Welcome everyone. Good evening. I'm Rose Fini. I'm President-elect of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. Welcome to our conversation this afternoon. This is another version of the Hot Talk. The Hot Talks are sponsored by the Bar Association to have civil discourse on critical, important topics in our community. And today we are here to talk and get an update on the Justice Center project, one of the most important projects that is happening in the community. We have three panelists with us this afternoon, and I'll start with some introductions overall, and then we're gonna get into some questions that Subodh, Chandra, and I, who will co-moderate the event with me, and getting some of the details out regarding the update. And then we are going to turn to questions and answers. This conversation and the analysis that has gone into this project is so intense, and there are so many components and parts to it. So this conversation is going to be high level. We are trying to get the forest and the big picture concepts discussed, and so we can have a very hearty discussion about these important topics. So we're going to try to stay away from the minutia because there is a lot of detail involved in all of these decisions. So the overview of the update, and then we're going to get to question and answers from you in the audience. So think of what questions you have, put them in the chat if you're on Zoom, and if you're on Facebook, post those questions there. So our first panelist is Jeff Appelbaum. He is the Managing Director of Project Management Consultants, and also serves as a partner at Thompson Hine and as chairman of the construction law group there. For 40 years, Jeff has served the construction industry in varying roles of trial and transactional attorney, project counsel, project management consultant, mediator, and partnering facilitator. Jeff has provided distinguished service to public and private owners, design professionals, construction managers, and contractors on important projects throughout the United States and Canada. We also have with us today Andy Cupples. He is a senior principal at DLR Group. Andy is one of the most respected justice facility architects in the United States, recognized nationally and internationally for the design and planning of court and correctional and detention facilities. He has more than 35 years of experience working with clients at the federal, state, and municipal level, and extensive experience in California and West Coast. He is a key member of DLR Group's Justice Plus Civic national team and leads international justice pursuits for the firm. And then we have a third panelist joining us, Ken Chandra. And correct. Ken is going to just give us a quick overview of your background, Ken, please.
Thank you, Rose, and good afternoon. Ken Chandra, I'm an architect and principal at DLR Group. I am a justice planner, been focused on for the last 30 plus years on planning justice facilities across the country, in Canada and the Mideast, with a specialty in courts planning, working at both at the federal, county, state, and municipal level. And through the years, I've had the opportunity to work with two former court administrators and clerks to have a better understanding of the operation aspect and how it directly relates to functional planning.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken. We're glad you could join us for this discussion to enhance the discussion around the courts. And finally, Subodh Chandra, who will be my co-moderator, helping me with questions, both of his own and fielding them from the audience. Subodh is a former federal prosecutor, law director for the city of Cleveland, and large firm litigator. Subodh Chandra is the Chandra Law Firm LLC's founding and managing partner. His practice focuses on high-profile civil rights litigation, along with white-collar criminal defense and internal investigations. Before founding the firm, Chandra served as director of law for the city of Cleveland, a billion-dollar corporation. Chandra led the work of an 82-lawyer department with both criminal and civil divisions. He also sometimes served as Cleveland's acting mayor. Welcome, everyone, and thank you again for being here. And we're going to start, again, a lot of the public discussion that we have facilitated. We saw that the COVID-19 pandemic interrupted some of the work of the steering committee. And so our reporting out on some of the developments also slowed. But today and this afternoon represents the start, the restart of this conversation and continual involvement in the project. So last week on November 12th, there was a critical steering committee. So the Cuyahoga County Justice Center Steering Committee met, and they made some important determinations. And what we're going to focus on are the two critically important items. The first is that, and I will point out that the steering committee unanimously agreed that number one, a new county jail will be built outside of downtown Cleveland, separate and apart from the courthouse. So that's the first item we'll spend some time talking about. And then the second item that was unanimously decided is that the county will either build a new courthouse on site in downtown Cleveland, or the existing county courthouse will be renovated. So that is the framework for our discussion this afternoon. And this is where we now want to dive in to some of the analysis, what these decisions mean. And again, all of our panelists, try to keep it high level, try to be succinct, and let's start with one of the first topics in the broad picture. And that question is, why is separate and apart of the jail and the courthouse better?
Jeff is still trying to join us, so I'll jump in for Jeff for a moment. You know, we looked at several different options, and let me just go back for a moment, if I may, Rose. What happened when the pandemic started, we were moving ahead with about continuing planning and design for the court and the jail simultaneously. The pandemic had a huge impact on the courts, as you all know. So they asked us to hold off on doing the court's work. Of course, the jail had to keep running day to day to day to day. So the jail moved ahead at a quicker pace. That's why we're at today, where we were at with the steering committee, where we went for a determination moving forward with the jail. But the other part of that determination is that planning will continue on the courts. So I just wanted to make sure that as background at the highest level, we discussed that. Jeff, have you joined us now?
I'm on. I can hear
Okay.
you now. I apologize. There's something going on with
problem.
my video, and you'll have the fortunate benefit of being able to hear me, but not having to see me. That's probably a good
Okay.
thing.
So Rose had just phrased the first question, Jeff, which you were going to start. Why separate and apart is better?
Okay. So let me begin with this, and I'll turn it over to Andy, since he's going to have the video or some PowerPoint slides to share on this. So initially, we did, and you should know this, we did 3 or 4 separate studies to study separate things. And the first question is whether or not Jail 1 or Jail 2 could be used at all, either operationally or whether from a construction point of view, they could even be renovated within reason. So one study that we did was, what is operationally, could Jail 1 even be used? And can Jail 1 and Jail 2 be used? Number 2, even assuming they could, what would be the comparative cost, both in operations and in construction, versus a new facility? So we start out with that premise of those 2 studies. The next thing which occurred is we were asked to do 2 additional studies. One study was, even if Jail 1 could not be used, which was a conclusion, can you at least use Jail 2? If the courthouse was going to be there for some time, could Jail 2 be used as a pretrial facility? And then at the same time you're using Jail 2 as a pretrial facility, could you have a longer-term facility somewhere else? Would that work? The final question that was asked was, what if we can get our population down to 1,000 or some low number? Would it then make sense to be able to use Jail 1 and Jail 2 at all? Well, I'm going to tell you, and Andy will go into this in some detail. The first step of what we realized was that really Jail 1 and Jail 2, from an operational point of view, are virtually unusable. From a safety point of view, from the point of view of the perspective of the well-being of those who work there and who are interred there, it did not make sense. That led to the follow-up question. And the follow-up question is, if you really cannot use Jail 1 and Jail 2, what is the most effective, efficient, and best jail you could build? And as you'll see as we go through this, that was a campus jail, a jail on 30 to 45 acres that is laid out, that is flexible, that is more humane, that is easier to operate. And then the question is, if you do that, where do you put the court? You have two choices. You would never, you could not build a campus-style jail downtown. You could never find, the area, and you could not have a flexible downtown jail. So you're out to 30 to 45 acres. Well, would anyone ever want to put a courthouse that far away from downtown? And the overwhelming answer was no. So the conclusion we came to, and Andy will work through this, is that separate and apart is better. We then went through the operational issues as to why it's better, the cost issues as to why it's better, and we'll address those specific issues. But that is the summary of every piece of work we did. Now I'll turn it over to you, Andy.
Yeah, and I just asked Rose, can you see my screen? The
Yes.
PowerPoint screen? Good, I
Yes.
just want to make sure. Just stepping back for a moment, what Jeff said, you see on the screen two options. 1B was to stay downtown and reuse Jail 2. The other three options were all a new jail on a remote site. And quite frankly, when this was presented to the steering committee back at the end of December, January, the new jail on a new site was overwhelmingly selected, but we were asked to also consider what if we could expand downtown. So that there was a good basis for comparison. What you see on the screen is what we call our stoplight chart, green, red, yellow. Basically, as you can see, in a new facility, we can basically accomplish everything we set out to do, which is focused on a lot of issues, first of which is best practices for operations and getting away from some of the issues which has plagued the county in the operations and how we treat people in the existing Jail 1 and Jail 2. And there were a lot of shortfalls of staying downtown. So just from a programmatic perspective, there's no question we could do better with a new facility. And then the next slide shows that the construction cost is hugely different. Why is that? First of all, if we reuse Jail 2, we have a phased project for escalation, which stretches us out over twice as long, which raises costs. Downtown sites require deep POW foundations, which are a huge cost. So while our new construction cost is more obviously for a new jail, if we look at escalation, all the extraneous costs of trying to build downtown adjacent to the courthouse, it became a real issue. And the other issue is that we'll talk about in a moment is flexibility, both to either be smaller or to be larger. So again, as I said, it's about a $55 million differential without site costs. And we know that the only site that's available is going to be quite a bit more costly to stay downtown. And there's also a huge issue in operational costs. One of the things we're not getting in the weeds on, Rose, is the housing units in the existing jails are very, very small. The operational efficiency is not there that we could get in a new facility. We project at least a $9 million savings just based on the number of housing units we'd be operating.
That's $9 million a year, by the way.
$9 million a year. And where that comes from is every housing unit that I create requires 5 officers to run it 24/7 with shift relief. It's not just 3 for 3 shifts, because you've got to account for weekends, training, vacations, et cetera.
Andy, when we're talking about the operational cost, does that include the transportation cost or go ahead?
Yes, it does. We did include in this, it's going to be about $800,000 a year for transportation costs. And the good news on transportation, we'll touch on a little bit later, is right now transportation for the jail is handled by a separate division of the Sheriff's Department. it's going to be switched over to where the jail's responsible. So that there's clarity of responsibility for assuring we have everybody in the courthouse when they need to be there.
One of the things, Rose, that we spent a lot of time on, we know that up until now, and we'll show this to you in detail, up until now, because everyone is used to having a jail that is attached to a courthouse, there was a lot of, concern about what happens if you detach them. And what we will show you, not only is this done in multiple other locations, we will show you how it would work, we will show you the cost involved with how it works, and how overall it becomes a much better solution. So we'll go into that.
I think the bigger issue is our ability to provide a standards compliant, best practices driven facility. And this is the diagram we used for the last meeting with the steering committee. Single level jail. Those of you that have been in the jail, for example, the recreation areas now are gymnasiums effectively that happen to have some louvers to the outside. The sunlight never hits anybody's body. So the quality of environment, because we've found, and it's proven that the quality of environment, how well you do design, affects not only how the offenders behave, but also affects how the staff reacts to the offenders. And it really supports better operations. The other thing, as you can see with the dotted lines, is this is very flexible in terms of how we could grow over time if we need more beds, or more importantly, one of the underpinnings of this whole project is population management. It could be built smaller, as we work our way towards what the jail of the future is.
So Andy, let me butt in here and let me do a couple things that are important with this graphic along the lines of your question.
Okay.
And Jeff, let me butt in too, because, we want to keep it moving too. And because our audience, we want to understand the intricacies here and, of everything that I've listened to, the operational efficiencies, the well-being of those that are housed there. So many things are coming out of this better design. One of the things that our audience specifically, we want to talk to is, as attorneys, we're used to having the jail close to the courthouse. In your comments, I know you're going to get to how the jail being separate from the courthouse is not going to create more impediments for attorneys in serving their clients well too.
So let me start with this diagram, because I'll start that conversation with actually something shown on the diagram. Now, two things, and one thing about the diagram. So you see that central area. That central area that is built, that can support, and you see everything else in the housing units. The central area can support a smaller number of housing units. For 1,600, it can support up to 2,400. Now, the key thing to understand here is, unlike the current jail, where if an offender, an inmate, is in that housing unit, he has no ability to talk to his lawyer from that housing unit. He has to be moved to an interview area, okay?
Mm-hmm.
What happens with this facility are two things. Number one, and we'll show this to you in a different way, but each one of these housing units has everything, all the movement that you would have with an offender. In other words, attached to it is not only the recreation area, not only a little medical area, but there's also a confidential area there for interviews. There's an interview room. So a couple of things happen.
I'll pull that up, Jeff, if you give me a second. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay,
so a couple of things happen with this. Number one, and by the way, when you go, you just went over to a different slide, Andy.
There it is.
Yeah. So two things that occur with this. Number one, any lawyer that does still want to have the in-person visit can go there. There's going to be plenty of parking, ample opportunity. But the other thing is that at any point in time, the offender can right from there can go right into this private, secure room, can do an online conference, WebEx, Zoom meeting, whatever, can talk to his lawyer in a secure way. There does not have to be the limited hours anymore for those visits. We did talk to the public defender about this, Mark Stanton, and initially his biggest concern about doing this was the lack of connection. When he understood how this works, and the one thing that the COVID pandemic did give defense lawyers was the opportunity to do this. As they got more comfortable, they realized that this is one good way of making connections, that this will be available. It's what is done in a lot of other locations. So at the end of the day, there actually will be enhanced ability to have these communications, both in person, but also through these secure video rooms at all hours.
And Jeff, since we're talking about this remote, communication between attorney and client, will we also, as part of the planning, include better, remote interfacing with the courts to then further reduce that transportation cost?
Yes.
Yes, and Andy, why don't you take that one, Andy, because you can talk a little bit more about how that works.
Yeah, what we do plan to have, first of all, a central booking, central intake is off-site. There'll be video to the video arraignment courts, not just to downtown, but to all the suburban courts. The intent is to really make both of these buildings technologically smart. And one of the things that came out of our discussions and looking at siting is actually providing for that in the courthouse also, so the defense attorneys that are having a discussion with the prosecutor that want to talk to their client can do it right from the courthouse, or if they're in a discussion with the judge, to make sure that every space is capable of having communications. I'd also point one other thing out, and I'm going to go back for a moment to talk about the transportation. The issue with transportation is really as bad as it. You know what? It's just as bad now with the existing jail. Do you know why? You only have holding capacity underneath the courthouse for about 40 or 50 people, and that's even beyond what it's supposed to hold. So you don't have everybody there in the morning when they need to be there. You need to have holding for about 200 people at the courthouse first thing in the morning. And that's what we're planning the courthouse for, that we'll be able to use buses. You will load them up in the morning. 200 plus defendants can be at the courthouse before the court opens and can be shuttled directly into the courtrooms and then taken back to the jail as needed. We've also talked about the jail being no more than 15 minutes driving distance from the courthouse, because there's always that chance that somebody needs to be brought that was missed on the list. And we went through exactly what it's going to be. We're talking large over-the-road buses. We're looking at how we staff it. And Rose, that's where we got the $800,000 plus a year for transportation. And I've been through a lot of this with a lot of clients. Philadelphia was absolutely going to build a 500-bed jail behind their new courthouse. They realized they never have the right 500 bodies there. And that actually came out when we looked at reusing jail 2. It only holds about 400 beds. Well, typically 75% of the pretrial population, of the jail population, is pretrial. You're never always going to have the right people there. You're always in the transportation business. So Philadelphia decided to build their new pretrial facility about 10 miles away, about a 20-minute bus ride. Maricopa County did the same thing. I mean, this is pretty standard for a couple of reasons. One, a low-rise jail is more efficient to operate and safer because I'm not moving people up and down all the time. Two, it's less costly to build. Three, the land is typically a lot less expensive outside the city center than it is in the city center. Lexington Fayette, we actually built this jail out in the middle of horse country. And that's why it looks like a horse farm, because it had to fit with the community. And that's another concern as we look at sites. So the point we're making is what we're proposing here is pretty standard for major urban jurisdictions because of the ability to have flexibility, the ability to drive down operational costs. And I think, again, with the COVID issues have really shown how technology can make things even work a little bit better than we ever thought they could.
Right. And of all the hardships that COVID-19 has produced, this has been one upshot. to certainly shore up all of us attorneys and our use of technology. So glad to see that. I mean, the timing couldn't have probably been better for the purposes of your work and planning the jail. And you've touched on the intersection of the importance of the diversion center, and that, you know, is such a critical component, particularly with respect to addressing mental health and substance abuse issues. And you know, we understand from the dialogue, we also have to have this discussion about bail and bond reform. Can you just touch on those two topics a bit further?
So let me make 2 points about this. When we told you that we're looking for a 1,600 bed rated capacity, which means 1,350 targeted beds, that cannot be accomplished if we are not successful in reducing the jail population, and which is why we've had these very strong initiatives. There's really 3 things that are part of this. One is clearly diversion, and right now we are in the process, the county's in the process right now of setting up an initial diversion opportunity. We are targeting initially 150 beds. That when I say 150 beds, we can immediately, we think, reduce jail population by 150. We think that's expandable. Andy will walk through where we're at on diversion. And of course, that's critical because right now there's just a very large percentage of people in the jail who are there for really no other reason than serious mental illness or SMI. So that's one thing. Clearly, another initiative is bond reform. Right now, as we look at this, there are a huge number of individuals who are in jail solely because they cannot make low bail reform, and they cannot make very low levels of bail. You know, and by the way, the city of Cleveland has actually done a very good job with this. With their pretrial program, when this all started, they probably had somewhere in the vicinity of 200 to 250 people in that jail. They're down. Now, part of this, they're down to 50, and they believe it can be sustainable about around 75, and that's because they've done such a great job with their pretrial initiative. So that's critical.
Yes,
there.
and Judge Early we have had her on other previous Hot Talks going into detail on that. So I encourage our viewers to go ahead and look at those archived Hot Talk discussions. Really good progress she's making. So yes.
And then the third part is central booking. And there's another part, better information systems. And Andy is going to take a couple minutes just to give you a couple highlights, but I will tell you that the most important, or one of the best functions for the Bar Association, because we can't drive bail reform, but the Bar Association can. The Bar Association can help with the diversion initiative, but these are critical. You don't get to these numbers if those programs don't work. So, Andy?
Yeah, that's very...
Yeah, and Andy, let me just interject, since Jeff, talked about the importance of the Bar Association, and we couldn't agree more, Jeff. The Bar Association has been involved in and has spoken to the importance of bail and bond reform. We are impaneling our second thrust of our racial equity in the law project, the REAL initiative that we launched in the summer. In response to having a more coordinated effort in addressing systematic racism issues. So we absolutely are on board to lead more discussions and do whatever we can do to take the bail and bond reform discussion further and initiative further. So we are in it. Thank you, Andy. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rose, it's kind of interesting. It's been almost 2 years since we interviewed for this project. And one of the things we talked about in our interview was the Bexar County San Antonio Restoration Center as a model. We actually had planned to take the county to see it. We weren't able to, but we did do a virtual tour. And that's the backbone for what we're doing with diversion, to see that it's been done before and it works. And it is more than it's more than about a facility, because we're actually talking about doing this with contractors, with people in the community. It's not about building another building. It's about the program. This is short-term diversion. This is people that would otherwise go to the jail. And it actually benefits not just the individual, it actually benefits law enforcement, because we found that typically law enforcement would rather go to the jail than go to a hospital, because if they go to a hospital, they'll be there 3 or 4 hours. If they go to the jail, they drop the person off and they're out in 15 minutes. But this program is really extended to be pretty broad, and we will provide you with this link if people are interested in looking at what the diversion center can be. These are various videos on Bexar County. So if you'd like to have that to send to your membership, we're more than happy to do that. But our program is really, the goals are pretty broad. It's a call-in line for law enforcement to ask, what can I do? It also talks about county-wide crisis intervention training. So that this probably fits in a lot with the initiative you're discussing from the Bar Association. For how does law enforcement deal with individuals? Because that's where it really starts. And then to create this assessment and diversion center, we've been through an RFI and RFP. The county's now looking at final negotiations to get this started. And this would be short term. This is people stabilization off the street so that they can be cited and released, rather than simply committed. But the county's now looking at going beyond that and looking to develop longer term treatment capacity, which could even be a further alternative. So I think this is really a strong underpinning of getting us to where we need to be.
Right, and I was going to add just such an important element right now as we continue to see, law enforcement response to folks with mental illness. That's such an important topic out there, and seeing, the study and how we can more effectively handle these issues is, I think, will improve our community response significantly.
Yeah.
Before we go to this slide, Andy, I want to make a point, which is before we got started, before I got retained, the study that we had said we had to build a jail for 2,400 people. Keep in mind, we're talking about 1,600. Now, it is only because of these initiatives that we can get this down. And keep in mind, before COVID hit, if you look at January, even after people have been talking about all these initiatives for years now, in January, the average daily population was 2,055. Now, if once again you put your 15% factor on that, that would still imply that you have to build a jail that can hold 2,300 people. Keep in mind, we're trying to get down to 1,350. Now, so that tells you the challenge. What Andy's going to take a minute, because the question has been asked, did we learn something from COVID? Because in COVID, we did get the population numbers down. And is anything that we learned in COVID sustainable? So, Andy, why don't you take a minute on that?
Yeah, I will. This shows what the county was able to do in terms of numbers, but we actually started a couple series of meetings with stakeholders, because again, maybe one of the silver linings of COVID, if there is any, is across the country, if people had to start to take a look at managing the jail population. So our intent was to say, what have you done? Is it sustainable or not? And Rose, you pointed out at the top, these are all the things the city has done. The city's original contract for the county was for 240 misdemeanor beds. They think they'll be at 75 to 80. The bigger issue is when we start to look at the Court of Common Pleas. They suspended indictments. Well, can they continue that? Probably not. But can we look at doing more direct filing so that people aren't waiting 3, 4, 5 days a week before there's even an indictment for a defense attorney to negotiate? They've refrained from sentencing. Probably there'll be more sentencing, but maybe we need to look at options. One of the big issues is, and this has been a huge driver of jail populations across the country, is technical violations of probation. Somebody missed a meeting. Somebody failed a drug test, a urine test. So immediately they get slammed back into jail. During COVID, we stopped that. We didn't pick people up for technical violations. Well, we again, in terms of our law system, we do want to have some enforcement, but maybe there's a way to get people before a judge quicker so we cut down the number of jail days. So those are the kinds of things we continue to talk about that we believe have to be done to drive the population down to even the 1350. This little table I just put up is there's been a lot of talk, and I'm sure your membership has heard this. Well, what's driving the jail population is delays sending people to the state prison. And there's no question there are delays. Right now they have to be quarantined, and if one person in that group tests positive, it starts all over. Yes, people are being kept longer because of that, but if you look at January, February, and March pre-COVID, that was about 17 to 22% of the population. It's no greater than that today. So that's really not the thing that's driving the population. The things that are driving the population are things that we can control locally. There's been a lot of discussion about cash bail. There's been a lot of discussion about a unified approach to bail countywide. Those are very, very difficult issues, and you probably more than us can help influence those. But the couple things that have been important is having a full-time jail expediter that's looking at the population every day. One of the things that jail expediter's done is referred cases to the bail program that's willing to help people, and then follow through and make sure they get there. The point I'd make about the city's program is not only have they driven their population down, their failure to appear rate is bottom. That people are showing up because rather than just paying an amount and then forgetting about it, you're getting reminded all the time as to when your court appearance is. That's what helps people be successful. And I think ultimately that's the goal, is better outcomes so that people are successful. And then Jeff mentioned the data reporting. I just wanted to show what it means, what we're talking about, to emphasize what Jeff said. At 1350 ADP, we're looking at a reduction in the peak population of over 40%. A huge change in the use of jail in Cuyahoga County. And we think that's doable. We really do think that's doable. We were asked the question, well, we were down to 900. What would that mean? If we went down to 1,000, we'd be at 55% of our peak numbers. So that's a pretty laudable goal. And I'd like to see us hit the higher goal. It's ironic. I'm always accused of, you just want to build a bigger jail. No, we want to do the right thing.
We want to build the smallest jail.
Good. And let me jump in because we've got some questions coming in. And we just saw the new order come out yesterday from the courts. Given the call from our hospital systems and Dr. Akram Boutros at Metro Health, given the concerns for the rise, we again see that we are not going to have folks incarcerated because on the low level misdemeanors or any actually misdemeanor which doesn't involve domestic violence or and so these discussions are real. And Subodh, do you have any questions up until this point? And we're gonna get to the one I know folks are anxious and interested to get to the courthouse discussion, but Subodh, any questions at this juncture on what we've talked about with the jail?
Yes, just one follow-up question on the capacity issue. I'm absolutely fascinated by how all these discussions about space and location and capacity are dovetailing with reform issues. But I also want to be optimistic about the future of our county, potential population growth. Are the plans that you've developed, do they contemplate the potential for expansion should that become necessary? Or are you anticipating, based on site location and what you have in mind, that this is it? It's going to be 1,600 period, even if the county eventually needs more than that.
Subodh, so if you, that diagram that we briefly flashed up there, what that is, and we can show it to you again very quickly if you want to get back to it, Andy.
I'm getting back to it.
we are absolutely talking about flexibility, and this is also what is different about this kind of a jail than doing a high-rise jail or a downtown jail. If you can imagine, the jail that we have right now, there's no capability or capacity. You can't add to it, you can't subtract to it, because it's this outside structure. It is what it is. In this kind of complex, what you see there is the core, that area on the bottom, that can accommodate 1,600 up to 2,400. So what you do, each one of those housing units, those things on the outside, are housing units, and they're basically modular. So you can start out, you can create this site that has, you know, future expansion. Actually, we hope we never use the future expansion. The only reason we'd want future expansion is we had tremendous population growth, by the way.
Right.
But what this does is you can start out with your targeted units that house 1,600. If you see the population growing and are concerned, you can add another one of those housing units. Frankly, if we really do great and get the numbers down, you could actually eliminate a housing unit. But this is modular, it's flexible, which is one reason you do it horizontally and not a downtown vertical jail, which has no flexibility at all.
Okay, understood. Go ahead, Rose.
No, this is great. So let's give some final thoughts, Jeff and Andy, on the jail, and turn over to the courthouse, because I know folks are anxious to hear some of those reports.
I think
oh, go ahead, Andy.
I think the final comment I would make on the courthouse, on the jail, which I think is absolutely important, is this emphasis on creating a central booking process, which is focused on diversion. Even if somebody's brought to the jail, can they be diverted? Which allows the prosecutor to talk immediately with arresting officers. I mean, I'm sure as many of your defense attorneys have dealt with, how many felony 5s end up ultimately being a misdemeanor? You know, the sooner we can make those kinds of decisions, the sooner the defense counsel or the public defender can meet with the prosecutor, the sooner we can put somebody in front of a pretrial investigator, the sooner we can reduce the population. So the central booking, that's the last comment I'd make. And again, we'll send you some links to tour the Harris County facility. We were going to go see it, but again, COVID meant we had to do it virtually. This is really a critical element in controlling the front door of who comes in. Jeff?
My final comment on the jail is to let you know what's coming next. So what we're doing right now, we had 4 determinations last week. They were all passed. We are now prepared to go forward on the jail. We put out site criteria, and you can see this in the materials you have, and if someone wants to talk about it, we can get into it. But what is the criteria for selecting this site for a jail? And there's a whole series of criteria. The idea now is to locate the site or locate potential sites, to score it based on the criteria, and find the best site. At the same time, we will now go out with an RFQ for the conceptual designer, who will take design to the next step, confirm the program, take the next step. And while that's going on, there's going to be parallel processes that the county has to indulge in. One of them is to determine the financing plan. I will tell you that most of this cost will be paid for simply by operational savings. And then finally, what are the other agreements that go along with this jail? For example, an agreement between the city and the county. Are there other entities that become involved with this project? Are there municipalities, which is a possibility? So that's all what happens next on the jail.
Good, good. And a question that came in, going back to central booking, what is the timeline there?
Well, there's 2 timelines. So, and I'll let Andy answer the second one. For the ultimate central booking, of course, that is put in place as part of this jail. We have been working very hard on something called interim central booking. Interim central booking really has 2 components. The physical space is one thing, but really getting all the different parties to agree and understand how they have to operate together is the much bigger issue. Now, we have been working with the county on this. We have developed The question is, how do you do this without overspending, given the fact that you're going to have a permanent solution later? How do you thread the needle on that? But we think it's very important for the county to get a head start. And, the sooner you can get a central booking system going, even if you don't have the new jail, the better off you are. And also the more you learn. Andy, I don't know if you want to.
No, I think that's fine, Jeff.
Yeah, and the question, did the interim booking, not to get into the technical issues, but I think I read that the RFP had to go back out. Was there some hang up with the interim booking, interim central booking process that's caused some delay? We had a question come through on Facebook.
There are two issues. And I don't want to get into this too much. Primarily because this is the county's initiative, and in my owner's rep role does not involve putting this together. So I don't want to state more than I should or can. But I will tell you there's two issues. One issue is simply from a physical point of view, doing something in existing space which is cost effective. And the second issue is making sure that from a process point of view, there's buy-in from every party that has to be involved. And that is what is taking time and takes effort.
Yeah, the slide that's up now is what we presented to steering committee, which is getting that broad group of stakeholders to figure out how they're going to work together. So far, everybody's bought in: the prosecutor, the public defender. We're actually planning to have interview space in central booking for defense counsel if somebody has a private attorney. But to make sure that everybody, as well as interview space for pretrial, as we said earlier, the city's already well on their way. Their pretrial program is pretty amazing. Common Pleas is now looking at staffing up a pretrial program as well. And we've said from the beginning, it's more important that we get those processes working and start to drive the jail population down rather than simply waiting for a new facility to do it.
Right, good. And in respecting both of your, the limits of your authorization to speak to this project, given that the central booking is more within the county purview that you're not working on. I mean, can we say it's 6 months out, a year out for the interim central booking to be operational?
The goal is to have it operational in the spring, Rose.
Okay, in the spring. Very good.
Yes. I mean, it is moving along. We had actually completed pricing on the bigger project. Whenever the jail started to move forward, the county's obviously saying, how much money are we spending for something we're going to use for 3 years? So we've been helping them looking at rescoping it to make the budget more acceptable. But it is moving ahead, and the goal is to have it up and operating by spring.
Okay, and the other final up question that came in from the audience is, since the two of you are not running this project, is there a point person that somebody could reach out to?
On central booking?
Yes.
On interim central booking, Andy, whose name do you want to provide?
I would probably give you a couple names. Bob Corey, the Director of Public Safety, is taking on bringing the process things together. And Mike Deaver in Public Works is responsible for the physical side of the facility.
Yeah, so it is Mike, it is Bob, working on behalf of people like Bill Mason, Brandy Carney. So those are all people who are involved. Okay,
very good. Thank you for that. And I just want to remind our audience too that all of the presentations and the materials that you have presented to the steering committee are on the county website. It's the County of Department of Public Works. There is a website that is dedicated to keeping the public informed with these presentations. And so if you Google that, you're able to find a lot of the materials that you have presented over the course of this whole project. I mean, if anyone could type that in the chat box, that site for our members, that would be great. If Andy or Jeff, you have that handy. But now let's move our attention to the courthouse. I think that, Ken, we're going to involve you in the conversation a little bit more at this point too. Talk to us about some of the fundamental assumptions that need to be made in order to assess how big the courthouse should be, what it should look like, and you know, so giving us, again, starting at that broad brushstroke framework.
So I'll kick this off and turn it over. So like the jail, when it comes to the jail, the first issue you think about is what is the population that you have to serve. You know, that's why these numbers, the 1,600, was so critical. Excuse me. On a courthouse, the issue is the fundamental issue is how many judicial officers do you have to serve. There are other ancillary things that we're doing with the courthouse, like the prosecutor, public defender, but the primary driver is the number of judicial officers. Now, keep in mind that right now, the commitment, we have 3 courts that are involved directly in the process and 2 courts that are watching the process to determine what involvement they want. So the 3 courts that are in the process right now that have to be involved in a new courthouse are the Common Pleas Court, Domestic Relations Court or Division of the Common Pleas Court, and the Municipal Court. And the bottom line is that if you take a look at the number of judicial officers, which is judges and magistrates, you have to serve 99 judicial officers, which is 52 judges and 47 magistrates. So that is your starting point. Now, the next thing you have to understand is that there are some constraints that may exist in Ohio that do not exist in other states. And I'll give you the example. You can look at many other states, and there are concepts such as, for efficiency, courtroom sharing. There are many states where judges share courtrooms, or even if judges have a courtroom, it is not necessarily a full jury courtroom. So you may have 4 judges that share 4 courtrooms, each have a courtroom, but there's one jury courtroom for the 4 judges, one basically a hearing room where you would have could have a bench trial, smaller rooms, but maybe only one full-blown jury courtroom that has a jury box for which there's a jury deliberation room that can accommodate a criminal trial and everything else that you're talking about. In Ohio, we have something it's called the Rules of Superintendents, which is promulgated. You can look at your rule books and you will find the Rules of Superintendents, and there's an amendment to them. And these Rules of Superintendents purport to tell you what every judge needs in the state of Ohio. They are archaic, but I will tell you that the Rules of Superintendents, and Andy, I don't know if you purposely let your screen go away, but it did.
Oh, it did? No, I did not.
You have to just click on Zoom. For some reason, everybody's Zoom kind of collapsed. You have to click on the Zoom app again.
Oh, okay, there you go.
It's back?
Thank
Okay,
you,
good.
So the bottom line is, what do these Rules of Superintendents purport to say? Well, number one, they say that every judge has a courtroom capable of handling a jury. Every one. By the way, they say some other interesting things. They say that every courtroom has to have a chalkboard. They say that every courtroom has to have access to a pay telephone. So, to what extent do you honor these Rules of Superintendents? But that is the driver, and programmatically, that is what really, is an issue for determining how much you really have to build, how much structure you have to have.
Can I just follow up on that real quick?
Sure.
Jeff, has there been any discussion as part of this? Because I could see how it's sort of enlightening to realize that the need for shared space could be completely fine for most judges, and that you could only have a few jury trial courtrooms, and that would work out just fine. Has there been any discussion about potentially approaching the Supreme Court to see if we could get some amendments to the Rules of Superintendents to try to manage the cost of this project?
There are 2 issues. There's 2 things that the Supreme Court controls. One thing that it does control is the number of judges, and you can look at that. That's not an issue that we will ever talk about. I think that we will be returning. So what is going on with the process right now? I don't want to get too ahead of this. We were working on both the courts and the jail when COVID hit.
And Jeff, let me interrupt for a minute before you
Sure.
get to that. Just because we were on the numbers of judges, the question came in from our audience regarding the 99. How does Cuyahoga County compare to other counties in Ohio, say Cincinnati's Hamilton County or Columbus's Franklin County, in terms of the number of judicial officers?
I'm going to answer the question objectively with no comment. Other than that, I will tell you that the most comparable county to Cuyahoga County is Franklin County. Franklin County is very close now to Cuyahoga County in population. They're both in the 1.2 to 1.4 million range. In terms of common pleas court judges, Franklin County has half the number of common pleas court judges that Cuyahoga County does. In terms of municipal court judges, and for a different reason, Franklin County has half the number of judges that Cuyahoga County does. Now, on the common pleas court judge, it's simply a question of how many judges they have versus how many judges we have. On the municipal court judges, Franklin County has done one thing that Cuyahoga County has not done, which is they have consolidated their municipal court judges. So there are, it is not like what we have here. Here we have, the city has municipal court judges, and then every, we have, I don't know how many municipal court judges in outlying communities. That's all consolidated in Franklin County. So the bottom line is that, and this is why this is, and I'm not going to comment on whether that's right or wrong, but I will comment that that if you simply took a look at judge per population, we have twice as many, and if you build a courthouse out for the benefit of all those judges, twice as big.
Jeff, I would add to that the calculation is absolutely similar for cases filed and cases disposed for judicial positions. So that, Mr. Chandra, a very good question, but above our pay grade, so to speak.
Well, the reason I think it's important is that if the community is going to have to ultimately vote on the cost of a project, then somewhere in that process first of all, there ought to be a development of a plan A and a plan B. Plan A might conform with current rules of superintendent's requirements, and plan B might say, here's what it would look like, and here's what it would cost, significantly less, if we had something that we think is still very reasonable, but would require a modification of the rules of superintendents. We have Justice Mike Donnelly living right here in this community. We have Chief Justice O'Connor not living too far away. I would hope that somewhere in this process of cost planning, before we wind up trying to take anything to the public, that we would have at least a conversation with the Supreme Court to see if the requirements can be.
Let me just go ahead, Andy.
Well, again, I wanted to point out, we have we've maintained the 1-to-1 on judges.
Right.
We have went to about 1-to-2 for magistrates. So we've done what we could do within the rules of superintendents. But to your point, Mr. Chandra, based on doing what we're doing now, we're looking at a courthouse of about 1.24 million square feet.
Wow.
And because there's another issue that the way calendaring occurs, as you all are aware, every judge does both civil and criminal. So therefore, every courtroom also has to be criminal capable in terms of holding elevators, et cetera. So, you're basically driving, as you pointed, you are driving a very, very large building need, which comes to what Jeff said, which is the number of judicial officers to be accommodated along with their support offices.
Go ahead, Andy.
No, just one thing I would point out, this does take care of things like, I don't know if you're all aware, many of you probably are, because you worked in the county prosecutor's office, where we have 2 people in an office that was originally sized for 1. There are some other crowding issues that are being addressed, but the big driver is the number of judicial officers. Jeff.
So I will make the following additional comments. So what's going to occur here, if you simply take the gross building square feet, and if you take a cost associated with that, what will occur is that the total cost of the courts project, the jail project will pay for itself. That's not an issue. It's the courts project that becomes a problem, and this, of course, is going to be recognized. So now what happens, and in our role, we have to propose solutions, but we need the judges to support those solutions. So what we're going to do is we are going to, we can't control the number of judges, but we can do is suggest methods that this could be more efficient, and we will suggest methods that do not with the rules of superintendents, because if you did everything, if you did everything in strict accordance with the rules of superintendents, I will tell you that either renovating the courthouse or building a new courthouse will be cost prohibitive. And by the way, it's more expensive to renovate than.
And on that note, Jeff, why don't we talk a little bit about, the pros and cons? I mean, and maybe we start with the functionality or the financial pros and cons of renovating versus building new. What topic do you want to start with?
Well, we'll do both. And I will tell you, now I'm going to tell you that there's just a huge amount of information that we have developed because we have actually designed a new courthouse, we have in essence designed a new courthouse. We've in essence designed the renovations, and we can talk about this functionally. We can talk about this from a cost point of view. We can talk about this from an operations point of view. What I think we ought to do, Andy, and this is going to be difficult. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but why don't you do a high-level summary, and then we'll take specific questions. I think it's the best way to do this.
Ken, just jump in as I get through this.
Sure.
Yeah, we start with what the basic organization is of a courthouse. We did do, right before the COVID, we did visioning sessions with all the courts players. We talked about 4 versus 8 versus 12 courts per floor. We're probably moving more towards 8 courts per floor. We've looked at various ways to block and stack. And we have started to develop what are now the 2 primary options. There are only 2 options left for the courthouse. Renovate and expand in place after the jails are moved, or a new courthouse on a new downtown site. So one of the big issues.
Let me stop you there. And you might want to say, why would we ever expand the existing courthouse? Keep in mind that what we're trying to do here, one thing we have to do, if there's one group that is underserved in terms of space, it's the domestic relations court. The domestic relations court is in the old the old courthouse, and there is no way that you could renovate the existing courthouse in any fashion and still accommodate the domestic relations court. So if you're going to renovate, it's got to be renovate and add.
Well, and quite frankly, I think Ken's in my experience as domestic relations court is potentially one of the most dangerous courts because of what you're dealing with. And, you basically have magistrates that only have one way out of their office. You have magistrates doing hearings in their offices.
And there's no separation of parties on a public site. So,
so it's a critical issue. But the first option was, what do we do? But one thing you need to look at, besides the wavy look of those courtrooms, which has been changed, but is that the courtrooms lack accessibility. They have limited holding capacity, which affects your business as defense counsel, lack of visiting and quality of environment. We did analyze what it would take. So I'm just putting this up as right now, none of those courtrooms meet current American with Disability standards for accessibility. Virtually every courtroom would need to be fully renovated.
and to make this courtroom accessible, the judge will have to be 2 steps, not 3 steps above the floor.
Yeah. And so we did start, and none of this has actually been looked at yet with steering committee because we've been on hold. But basically the reuse would be a new annex, because we build the annex first, because we need to build the annex so we can vacate 2 to 4 floors of the existing building to do renovations. With parking structure, an office building, very similar to what we talked about before. the key to this is we tasked this out. It would take 14 years to implement this project.
And in the interim,
And-
when the jails are demolished, we have to create a temporary sally port and central hold in the PAB.
Effectively, the last step of this would be for domestic relations to move in, because we're building the annex in order to accommodate moving domestic relations over, but that's also our swing space then for renovations. And since the courts have to stay operating, we're not going to find a temporary home for them. We can only renovate, we believe, about 4 floors at a time. Correct, Ken?
Yes,
From our studies.
correct.
So when you talk about pros and cons, this is 14 years plus to completion, whereas a new building is probably 3 to 4 at the most.
Just
So
an idle thought here, real quick. Jeff, I don't know if you remember, but in Key Tower 20 years ago, there used to be these annex federal courtrooms. Do you know if those are still there and available, or have they been completely gutted out?
Tower.
Yeah.
The former annex is the current home of project management consultants, my ancillary business. Thompson Hine occupies one of those floors.
Okay.
And to the best of my knowledge, we did get rid of the courts.
So much for my quick solution in the middle of the presentation.
So again,
I thought you were going to ask me whether we'll continue to use the Global Center as the temporary courthouse, which we will not.
So basically, and again, we're just restarting these studies now, so all this is very preliminary. It's a much longer schedule, probably 3 times as long to get there, and probably 25% more expensive, Rose, in terms of your big picture pro and con questions. So what if we looked at a new courthouse? Again, we're looking at probably about 2 city blocks, looking at different ways to block and stack it, common pleas versus office space for the public defender and probation, a separate wing probably for domestic relations, housing court on the lower floor so that it can have after hours access. It's one of the things that came out of our studies, housing courts dealing with people that are paying rent during the day, that they'd absolutely be served with extended hours for the courts. So, just something which from a block and stack perspective would be the yellow on this diagram is basically office type space, and the blue is basically courtroom type space. But this would be about 25% less costly than renovation. Understand you have structure there, but you have a building that leaks. So we're really going to end up redoing the exterior structure of the Justice Center. And you also have escalation when you stretch that out over 14 years, and a lot of unknowns with renovation. So that's kind of where we are with it, with the main project, Jeff, unless you want me to just do a quick Court of Appeals.
That's a good, let me just say 2 things. We do have 2 players who are watching this because ultimately the county has to deal, the current building isn't very, by the way, the thing that we haven't told you is how expensive it is to continue to maintain these courts and how much money will have to be spent, not for new program changes, but just because of deferred maintenance. We have 2 courts that are also in the old courthouse. We've done a study as to what is involved, how many judicial officers they have, how much space would be involved, and what would be done with them in the old courthouse, and if they were, brought into this project, what another floor in this project would involve. I don't think we have to get into that right now, though.
Okay.
Well, just to follow up on that, though, could you please, is the intention to vacate that old courthouse or to continue to use it for court functions of any kind?
Well, the issue is this: so right now the domestic relations court definitely wants to go to a new facility. Their situation is actually very poor. Up until now, neither the Court of Appeals nor the probate court have indicated a desire to leave. And so far, the county executive has said, "I'm not going to force you to leave." I will say this, though. If we do build a new courthouse, and if the domestic relations court is out of that building, it's not an efficient building to maintain just for a probate court or a court of appeals. There's different ideas of what you could do. For example, the court of appeals, we've said to them, you can maintain your ceremonial courtroom and still be a few blocks away with the rest of your operations. Like ride the circuit, occasionally go to that ceremonial courtroom, which is beautiful, and I would never want to see that change. Doesn't mean they have to have their operations there, but you can imagine a situation where that building, it's a beautiful historical building. It'll never go away, but it actually may become a more accessible public building because you may have some limited court function there, but then the rest of the building is opened up for other operations and other ideas. But that we're not really very far down the line on that yet.
And I'm going to remind the audience to, send their questions in. Jeff, you've given us some broad, indications, and Andy as well. 14 years to renovate versus 3 to 4 to build new. Of course, there's obvious accelerated costs with given a 14-year endeavor. Do you have any numbers put together on those differences right now?
The only thing I will tell you, because I can't get ahead of what we've already provided to the steering committee, but I will tell you that the cost, putting aside the issue of timing, and also putting aside the issue of the renovation necessarily will have some restrictions on what you can do programmatically, versus being able to paint on a new painting completely, but it's probably 25% more expensive to renovate than it is to build new, something like that. Andy, I think that's the number that we've determined.
Yes. That's driven by, even though you have some sunk costs in the existing building, when you start looking at the escalation, and that does not include the cost of multiple moves. Because again, if we vacate 4 floors, we're going to take, 16 courtrooms, move them into the new annex, then move them back, and then move out, and move back, and move out, and move back. That's driven by the fact that we do not believe we can get away with using the existing courtrooms in their current configuration. That, quite frankly, that's an accident waiting to happen.
So the issue, and so what's not considered there, it would be 25% more expensive from a construction cost point of view. There's a much greater expense from an operational point of view, which is not included in that calculation.
And ultimately, Jeff, we'd probably have to have higher contingencies because of the impact of that on.
Oh, you'd have to have much higher contingencies because, as any of you who've been involved in construction know, the contingency for a build new site is much lower. I mean, you still have issues. You can have, unforeseen conditions and, subsurface conditions, although we know pretty much what's in Cleveland. But, the issues in renovation, when you start to renovate a building, what's behind a wall, what hasn't been properly represented in a previous drawing, those can become pretty significant. So you have to put more money aside for those issues as well.
Jeff, just a couple of follow-up questions. I mean, what are the proposed locations that are being considered for these new facilities, number one? And number two, this maybe relates to the cost issue, then what sort of benefit from the existing courthouse location once one either figures out how to repurpose that or demolish it?
I want to be careful about this one because, Subodh, I don't want you to go out and invest in the property that I tell you about. So no, but
fair enough.
And I know you. No, needless to say,
my investment strategy always consists of buying high and selling low, so you don't need to worry.
Right. Tell me about it. The issue here, and I'm gonna show you something in a second. So there, for the jail, I'm not gonna identify anything in terms of a specific site, but I'm going to tell you about the criteria.
Right.
For the jail, and I'm gonna share that in a second. For the courthouse, it's pretty well established that the courthouse will have to be in the downtown core, located pretty close, to the existing courthouse. And there are locations we could think about. What we don't want to do, I remember when I inherited the convention center project, the site was already selected but not controlled, and Mrs. Fiore had the Sportsman's Cafe, and we didn't have the right of eminent domain. So, we already announced the site, and we didn't have control of that piece of property. That's not where you want to be. For this project, we want to, look at multiple properties, determine what property is, what's the easiest to acquire. We do have the right of eminent domain. Unlike a convention center or a hotel, we do have the right of eminent domain. We'd hate to have to use it. But Andy, why don't you put up the criteria?
I'm getting that right now, Jeff. I read your mind.
So to answer your question, Subodh, we'll show you what the criteria is for the selection. This is actually a scorecard. So what this does, imagine that we are looking at multiple pieces of property, and you're scoring them. You have a theoretical site A, B, and C. Green means it rates highly. Yellow is possible but cautious. Red, it could be a real problem. So what do we think about? Access to public transit, although I have to tell you, any place we would put a new jail, we would talk with RTA about putting stops there. Obviously, parking has to be big enough for parking and access. Highway access, we're talking about, proximity to an expressway or to a major thoroughfare. Proximity to the courts. We don't want to be too far away from the current court, or where a court is likely to be located for a jail. So we're talking about, the green is with 8 miles or 15-minute drive. Proximity to emergency services is important because you do occasionally have to have fire and ambulance nearby. If you want to flip this, Andy. Obviously, ultimately, what is the cost of acquisition and what is the ease of acquisition? What is the current ownership configuration? Does the county or the city control any of the property right now? Size and configuration. Is the site large enough to accommodate what we've talked about? Is 1,600 beds expandable to 2,400 beds? If that is a single level building, that may be up to 45 acres. If it's a 2/2, it may be half that. Community context, very critical. The site, does it have sufficient buffer from areas that would not necessarily want to have a jail there? Keep in mind that this contextually can be a much more attractive jail than what you're used to. It also will provide services in the community, and in the right community, it's actually a positive. If we go to the next slide, then we have technical issues, utilities, accessibility utilities. What about technical building issues, soil, drainage? Are there hazardous materials that an environmental study would demonstrate? Environmental and historical preservation issues. And then what are the impediments to development? Are there impediments that say, whether zoning, community opposition, other concerns that say...
And Jeff, can I interrupt? Yes, this is all very thorough, and this is, excellent regarding any site selection. So as usual, but just to keep things moving along, because we had a couple more questions come in, and our time is short. And we very much appreciate this more succinct discussion, because I know for many of our members, we can't spend the 4 hours on the steering committee. So thank you for, boiling this down to, nuggets that we can digest and understand. One of the follow-up questions was, in the context of looking at the court, what are the other agencies or services that will be part of the new Justice Center, such as, prosecutors, public defenders, pro se services? Are those a given in there, or are those still under consideration?
There is a program right now that has many of those opportunities. And Andy can talk about them, but we do. Now, let me mention one thing to you, though. I do want you to understand. A courthouse, if you think about how courts work, a typical courtroom has a ceiling height that's, the double what a office building or, an office floor would be. So when you are putting offices on the same floor as a courtroom, that is extraordinarily expensive because you have double the ceiling height. So to some degree, what you got to think about, even though you want these things to be in close proximity, you do need to think about what belongs in, or what is better in space, which is office space, versus what is better on a courtroom floor. So Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's what you see on the screen, if you can see the screen, is the entire program as it sits today. Common Pleas Court, prosecutor, public defender, housing court, all the clerks, sheriff, courts, court holding, etc. That's our base program. As we go through this in the future, and I don't want to predetermine any answers, we will be evaluating, does this need to be in the courthouse? Could it be in an adjacent office building? For example, right now the public defender's down the street 2 blocks. Does the prosecutor need to physically be in the courthouse? Because I've dealt with some counties where they say the prosecutor's another attorney's office, though their primary place of business is the courthouse. I think that will be one of the issues as we start to balance what's in phase 1 funding and what gets built, that'll have to be evaluated and discussed and decisions made by the steering committee.
Good point. And turning to one of our last questions that we have in the final minutes here, one question came in regarding our approach to the environmental aspects. Is there a commitment, or, and this is I think a more robust discussion down the road, but is there a commitment to a certain LEED certification for the project, whether it's the jail or the courthouse, or if it's not LEED certification that we're going to go after because of the associated certification fees? Is there an approach that addresses sustainability?
Jeff, if I could jump in on that, for the jail, the county's considering design build, which means that all that would be built into the process. Whoever the criteria architect will work with the county to determine that, but we would recommend at a minimum, the county looks for LEED Silver, and they also look for a wellness designation, that they've created the right kind of environment, because especially when we think about these buildings, people are spending their entire careers in them. When we talk about the jail, your staff actually are serving a life sentence 8 hours at a time. And the kind of environment we provide for people deals with how they deal with each other.
Andy, that's very intriguing. Is there a specific and standardized wellness certification now?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very interesting. Great.
And,
Well, go ahead, Ken.
No, it's Jeff. Go ahead, Rose.
Well, and we're in our last 5 minutes. At this juncture, Subodh, do you have a burning question that you were holding for this last segment?
Well, first, I just wanted to make sure, Ken, you had an opportunity to weigh in with your comments on anything you've been hearing so far.
No, everything has been covered at a high level regarding the court facility, and as indicated at beginning, we're going to be hopefully moving on, continue with the further development of the project.
Okay. No, that concludes it from my end, Rose. I think they've been very thorough in the time allotted, and it gives us a lot to think about. What are the next steps?
Yes, Jeff and Andy, closing comments. We're very appreciative of the information. You've identified a couple places where the Bar Association can serve in this project, and we will do so. But we'll look forward to the next steps, and we'll continue to keep our membership updated regarding all of the meetings.
My only comment will be, as we move through this, and we initially thought that this would be, we'd be driving the courts and the jails simultaneously. It looks like while we're still going to be working on the courts and the jails, the paths are a little bit different. They're parallel paths. We will continue, as far as I know, we're going to continue with these steering committee meetings in this process. I will also say that as we move forward with the jail, there will be a community engagement process. And I think it's critical that the bar continue to stay very informed and involved. We'll make the commitment to do this as often as you want. And I think you know what the issues are where you can really help. And right now, the most pressing issue is everything having to do with population management at the jails.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you to Becky for getting all of this queued up for us and for our members. You're absolutely right. This is, the beginning of more conversations with you, and we will be in communication down the road and set up more discussions as the project progresses. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.